story, a famous joke, about a wealthy man, a very wealthy man who lives in Beverly Hills. And this man was giving a tremendous amount of charity away every single year. However, one year he realizes that because he constantly gives to new organizations, new institutions, new synagogues, he was giving over 50% of his annual income away, which he was okay with, and he decides he's going to continue doing so. However, he realizes that he must stop giving to new organizations. He was going to cap it off. And so he puts a sign outside his front door that says as follows: "Hi, if I have never met you before, if I've never given money, given charity to your organization before, then please turn around and do not come through the gate. If I do know you, then please proceed as you regularly do." And so a man one day comes up to the front door of this man's home, and he knocks on the door, and the wealthy man answers the door, and the wealthy man says, "Good afternoon, how can I help you?" And the man says, "I'm actually collecting for so-and-so organization, very, very worthy cause." And the man stops him and says, wait a second. "Have we ever met before? Do I know you?" And the man says, "No, you don't." And the man says, "Have I ever given to an organization before?" He says, "No, you haven't." And he says, "Then I don't understand. Didn't you read the sign? Whether or not you agree or disagree with the sign, you must respect it. I said to not come to the front door if I don't know you." And the man says, "You're absolutely right. I apologize. Have a great day." He turns around and he leaves. He circles around the block about 5 or 6 times. 20 minutes later, he comes back up to the front door and he knocks on the door. The wealthy man again enters the door and says, "Excuse me, why are you back?" And the man says, "Well, you know, I'm collecting for so-and-so organization, very worthy cause." And the man says, "Hey, I just told you 20 minutes ago that I don't know you, so therefore I'm not going to give to your organization." And the man says, "What? You don't know me? What are you talking about? We just met 20 minutes ago." It was a little bit of a corny joke, but it's a great one. And believe it or not, this joke actually has a very, very profound and powerful message. The last thing that we want as Jews is to enter into Rosh Hashanah, to Yom HaDin, our day of judgment, to enter into the divine royal courtroom and feel as if we're strangers to God. Now, we of course know that we're never strangers to God. He's always with us. But there are moments that we get this feeling that perhaps it was an entire year since I last truly turned to God. Even if you're someone who davens, who prays every single day from a siddur, there are many of us who feel that we haven't truly turned to Him. That perhaps at a moment of sorrow, at a moment of struggle, when we had a tremendous challenge in front of us, to turn to God and say, "Please, I just can't overcome this on my own. Please help me." Or maybe after a moment where we truly succeeded, to say, "God, I couldn't have succeeded on my own. Thank you. Thank you for helping me." The last thing that we want is to get to Rosh Hashanah and feel that it's been too long, just way too long since I've turned to Him. That maybe we're strangers. Maybe we don't feel like He really knows us. This time period, these last few days before Rosh Hashanah, we have the opportunity to knock on God's door, to say, "We're here. We're here because we want to get close to you. We want to develop a relationship with you." So that 20 minutes later, or a few days later, we get to Rosh Hashanah, and God can't say, "You haven't come to me an entire year." God will know that we tried. We tried just a few days before, 20 minutes before. We tried to knock on that door to say, we don't want to come into Rosh Hashanah as strangers. We want to come as if God knows us, as if we know Him. There's a famous idea, a beautiful idea, that I saw in a sefer by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, Likutei Maharan. And Rabbi Nachman writes as follows. He says, imagine the following. A young woman who lives in a particular kingdom gets arrested by a police officer who works for the royal court of the kingdom. And this man arrests her for something that she's clearly guilty of, and he assigns her a court date 3 weeks later. 3 weeks come and go, and the young woman enters into the courtroom. She sits on one side of the court, and the police officer, who's going to be the man who will prosecute against her, sits on the other side of the courtroom. A few minutes later, in walks the king. The king would often preside in court sessions in the royal court, and he sits down on his throne at the very front of the courtroom. And a moment later, he catches eyes with the young woman, and he yells out to her, "Honey! Sweetie!" And the young woman turns to the king and says, "Daddy! I haven't seen you all day, I missed you!" And she runs up to him, gives him a huge hug, and sits back down on her chair, the chair of the accused. And so the prosecutor, of course, completely freaks out. He goes over to his desk, picks up the paper that had on it all the written documents, all the documents in which she was being accused of this particular crime, and he rips it in half, rips it into another half, rips it into a million pieces, goes up to the front of the courtroom, comes up to the judge, comes up to the king and says, the court case is closed. This young woman is innocent. He runs out of the courtroom. Rabbi Nachman explains why he runs out of the courtroom. Because no one wants to prosecute against the princess in front of the king. The last thing that this police officer, the last thing this prosecutor wants to do is to prosecute against the princess in front of the king. Rabbi Nachman explains that when we get to Rosh Hashanah, when we enter into the divine courtroom, we stand before the king, and the prosecuting angel, the Satan, the Sitra Achra, walks in. And the prosecuting angel has an agenda on Rosh Hashanah. He wants us to be guilty. He has a whole list of things that we've done wrong in the past year. But we stand before our Father. The King is our Father. And there's a moment where the prosecuting angel, who has his agenda, looks at us, and he looks at the King, and he says, are they close? Do they have a relationship? Or are they strangers? If they're strangers, then I'm not scared to prosecute against this man or this woman. I'm not scared to do that. But if they're not strangers, if they have a close relationship, even if that son or that daughter turned to the king only 20 minutes before or a few days before, still they're not strangers. And the prosecutor will rip up his paper and say, I'm not prosecuting against the prince or the princess in front of the king. I won't do it. If they have a close relationship, if they have love for one another, if they're not strangers but they're close, and that's the king's son or his daughter, I am not prosecuting against them. I am not prosecuting against her. These last few days are our last opportunity to knock on God's door, to turn to Him and say, I don't want to come to the courtroom as strangers. I want to be close with you. I want to have a relationship with you, where anyone who looks at us, forget the prosecuting angel, anyone who looks at us and sees that I have a relationship with you and you have a relationship with me. Because this is the end of the month of Elul. Elul is the acronym for Ani L'Dodi, L'Dodi Li. I am to my loved one, to God, and my loved one is to me. Let's enter into Rosh Hashanah not as strangers, but as having taken advantage of these last few days to develop that relationship with our King, with our Father, so that we come into Rosh Hashanah and feel that not only are we not strangers, but we are so happy to see the King, our Father.